What is podcast SEO and why should you care? This is what we're talking about on the podcast today with my guest, Anthony, who is joining me for the next 4 episodes to uncover all of the secrets when it comes to SEO. I don't want to give too much away of today's conversation because I want you to dive right in, but we're focusing on the element of discoverability. And this is a very powerful aspect to the SEO process. So be sure to hit that subscribe button so that you never miss an episode, and specifically so that you hit every single episode in our 4 parts together, because it's absolutely going to amplify your podcast growth. Now, Anthony is the best-selling author of the book Podcast Made Simple and the co-host of Why Your Podcast Isn't Growing. After spending 3 years working hard on a degree that wasn't taking him any closer to a life that he wanted, Anthony was determined to build a successful business in podcasting. Despite having zero experience in business or podcasting, he dropped out of college to go all in on a business. Fast forward to today, and he's now a 2-time best-selling author and has generated multiple 6 figures with a coaching business, helping podcasters grow and monetize their shows. Let's get into today's conversation with Anthony. Anthony, welcome to As It Relates to Podcasting. I'm really excited to have you on the show this month.
I know. I'm actually honestly absolutely excited and I'm buzzing for this. It's been a long time coming, I feel.
I know, it really has been a long time coming. Before we hit record, I was just saying how you and I, our paths have crossed so many different times in so many different ways. And when you suggested doing this series, I was like, absolutely yes. Like, this is the perfect series. And I think this, especially like the SEO side of this, I think that this is the most best kept secret in podcasting. Would you agree?
Yeah, I actually do. I would agree completely. It's surprising how a lot of people don't know about it. They're completely unaware or think it's too complicated. And there's a lot of beliefs around podcast SEO, what it is, how to use it, how effective is it actually. So yeah, it's going to be a good episode to kind of dive in and kind of reveal a few things that we've learned along the way.
100%. And I think there's going to be like a lot of myth busting in this podcast episode too. So we're going to start today. We're talking about over the next 4 weeks, we're talking about all things SEO. Today specifically, we're talking about what is podcast SEO and why our listener should care. So I'm just going to throw it back to you. And I want to know from your definition, from your perspective, what is podcast SEO? Because you have been doing this for a while and I know that you specialize in this.
Yeah, so honestly, I think podcast SEO is essentially the process of having your podcast rank higher, specifically on Apple and Spotify. So most people are familiar with general SEO, right? Where essentially search engine optimization, kind of ranking either a blog or a website a bit higher on Google so you get that organic exposure. That's the whole shtick, right? Get organic exposure, this, bada bing, bada bang, and helps with massively with discoverability. But when it comes to podcast SEO, it's specifically focused on having your podcast rank higher again on Apple and Spotify, because there are 160 million active listeners each month in America alone. And I believe 40% of them use Apple and Spotify to discover new podcasts to listen to, right? So using the search as a way to become more discovered by new listeners. That's it.
I love that. Now, why specifically Apple and Spotify? Why not all the other platforms as well?
Yeah, to be honest with you, I think the main reasons why is because those are the 2 most popular, right? So when we're optimizing for podcast SEO, all these will apply to other search as well, but specifically Apple and Spotify, because they are the 2 most dominant force when it comes to actually, ranking your show higher and where it matters, I'd say.
I love that. So when we're talking about SEO specifically, what are we talking about? Are we talking about, just the episode title? Are we talking about, using keywords? Are they even still effective? Descriptions, titles, author, like all of those things. Like, do they all matter still?
Great question. And absolutely. And I guess here's what I'd say. I think the common place where most podcasts we've seen over the last 3.5 years go wrong is the kind of idea that all you need to do is put some keywords in your title and show episode titles and your show name, and you're going to be exploding in discoverability and exposure. But it doesn't work like that. I wish it did. I'll be a very rich man if that was the case, but it's not that straightforward, right? There's a process. And for us, with our specific strategy, it's more of, this is going to sound to, like I'm some spiritual, lady here, but like it's more of a holistic approach.
Love
That's what
it.
I would say that we take.
I love it. Okay, so you really are looking at all of the different things. You're looking at titles, you're looking at, guest names, I think even would be really important. The way that they're phrased, the way that the hook is phrased of your, in your title. Would you say that like how the show notes even begin is important? Because everyone always talks about the hook, right? Like everyone always says you have to hook people in.
100%.
And I feel like your show notes have an opportunity for that. What would you say?
I love that. Yeah, you're totally right. I think so. I guess to break it down in terms of the layers when it comes to podcast SEO and how we approach it, I get more listeners. So the first thing that we do is we look at, okay, discoverability, which is which keywords should we rank for in the first place. Then we have visibility, which is the second part, which is essentially saying, hey, great, you're now being discovered. People can find you, but are they clicking and listening on your podcast versus the competition?
Mm-hmm.
The third is user engagement. These are kind of your review count, but also, more importantly, the completion rate of each podcast episode. Are people listening and binging your content from start to finish without a break, day or night? That's what we want, right? Maybe not so healthy for them, but it's as good for us and our numbers, right? And then the final piece is really the building relevancy. So this is a bit more intentional. So rather than just making a podcast episode and then titling whatever, when being intentional, what keywords do we want to rank for? And then building our content strategy to fit that mold so we rank for those keywords. So again, that was a lot. You're probably thinking, dude, what the hell are you talking about? So let me recap it for you if you're listening. Number one, discoverability, rank for the right keywords. Number two, visibility, being seen and clicked on. That's your cover, that's your title, that's your show notes, the conversion aspect. Number three is your user engagement, increasing the completion time of your podcast episode. And then the final piece is building relevancy, being a bit more intentional of which keywords do I actually want to rank for.
I love that. I love that. And this is actually the structure of exactly what we're going to be talking about over the next 4 weeks. So we're breaking them down episode by episode. So in this episode specifically, we're talking about that discoverability piece. So where would you begin with this? Like take us through your whole process in these next 4 episodes. Where would you begin with this discoverability? How do you even begin to rank, and how do you even begin to identify where you want to rank or which keywords you want to rank for?
I love that. And that's a great question. And I guess for us, and I think it's important to note, like, look, I'll be honest with you guys, like I really struggled when it comes to podcast SEO when I first got started. I thought it was like really complicated. You needed to be some kind of like insane genius who just has all the stuff figured out. And to be honest with you, for a very long time, Simona, I was totally unaware about the power of podcast SEO. I didn't realize it existed. I remember coaching clients, and at this point, we'd figured out how to kind of turn strangers into listeners through our, social media strategy. Yeah. We figured out how to help our clients land high-profile guests or guests on other podcasts. But I remember having this kind of like a nagging feeling. I don't know if you've seen some people in like communities where they're like, yeah, I grew my podcast to 10,000 monthly downloads in 90 days. And all I did was post consistently and did no social media promotion. I'm like, what? Yeah. So when I was seeing that a few years back, it kind of drew me insane because I just thought to myself, there's cause and effect to everything. The marketing geek inside of me was like, look, there must be a reason why this is happening, but I just couldn't figure it out. And you'd ask these people, well, what are you doing? You're getting a high profile guest. And they're like, no, it's a solo episode. And you ask them, okay, well, are you guessing on the podcast? They're like, no. Are you posting on social media as a kind of a promotional clip that you're doing? And they would always say no. And I went on the hunt to discover like, how the hell are these people doing this? Because if there's a way for me to help my clients grow their shows organically and I'm unaware about it, I felt like a bit of that was a word. I didn't feel legit, I felt like there's a secret that I didn't know about, right? Yeah. So I really want to get in and understand it. So I eventually found this guy called Jake Ward, who actually was a SEO genius. And turns out he grew his podcast to 300,000 monthly downloads. I think it was 7 to 9 months. Wow. Purely through podcast SEO. Now, major disclaimer, I haven't been able to replicate that. He's pretty insane, and it feels like probably partly a bit of luck and timing. However, that illustrates the power of podcast SEO. And ever since that point, I've been hooked and completely obsessed. So I'm saying this for you, if you're listening right now, and for you as well, Simona, like, I didn't even know about this until literally by luck, I bumped into this guy, studied the stuff, started applying it to our clients, and then developed a deeper understanding of how it works. And now, hopefully, on this podcast, I'll be able to break that down in a way that's not overwhelming for those listening, because I know that for me it definitely was. But yeah, look, I mean, in terms of the starting point is most podcasters, like I mentioned, will think about just the keywords they want to rank for, right? And if you're starting off, the likelihood is you already have so many podcast episodes that you've put out that aren't optimized for podcast SEO. What most people don't know is you can go back to your back catalog, change some of the title, switch up some actual episode title to start ranking for specific keywords. So whether you're in the personal development niche or business space or wherever, go through some of your back catalog and ask yourself, okay, number one, which keywords am I ranking for? You might have a podcast episode and realize I'm not ranking for any keywords. And a keyword simply means a search term. So the easiest way to do this is ask yourself, if I was a total stranger, what three keywords would I search into Apple or Spotify to discover this particular podcast episode? Right? So that's an easy frame, and that's the discoverability. What keywords would I search in on Apple and Spotify organically if I was a stranger to find this podcast? Now, if you're thinking, well, what keywords should they be? Ask yourself, if you had an interview that was an hour long, what were the 3 biggest talking points or pillars of our conversation? Then you can turn those talking points into keywords. You might, if it's a business podcast, you might have spoke about lead generation, but then you might have spoke about lead generation specifically for a real estate business, right? So now we have lead generation, we have a real estate business, and the final one could have been something random about anxiety when it comes to business, right? Those would be the search terms you want to use, which would be lead generation. If those are talking points, of course, for you, it's going to be different. It's going to be real estate and business. And then the final one could be around anxiety and business. Those would be the search terms you'd want to make sure are in your episode title.
Okay, I love this, and I have so many questions for you. So the first thing that I want to say is you touched on so many podcast myths right at the beginning of all of this, because creators think that the only way to grow a podcast is to guest on other shows, right? To bring on big guests onto their show, to do a whole ton of social media marketing, to run paid ads, and to throw all this money at it, when that's not necessarily the case. The goal is to optimize the content that you are already creating and let that content work for you. It's kind of the same as when you're posting a blog or when you're doing Pinterest and you have those longer tail keywords. And okay, so debunk this for me for a second. Podcast SEO, is it something that you're going to see take effect right away, or is something that takes a little bit longer? Something like Pinterest, for example. Like, when you put a pin on there, your pin is going to take, can take a few months for it to be picked up. Is this kind of the same idea?
So here's the interesting thing about podcast SEO. We've seen clients overnight, have a bump in terms of increasing their downloads overnight, right? We've also seen other clients where it takes a few months. So it's really hard. You can instantly start ranking for those right terms by changing your back catalog. That can happen. But again, it's not kind of like, it depends on all the other components. That's just discoverability. That's just you adding a keyword to your podcast title. That's not going to be the thing that makes the show blow up and get loads of exposure. It's going to be the other components, i.e. visibility. Are you able to turn those eyeballs that are discovering your show into listeners? That comes down to your cover art. It comes down to your show notes. It comes down to your episode title. How appealing is it? And then the second piece is, look, Apple and Spotify, they're selfish. They know what they're doing, right? They only they want to keep people on their platform. Right. So if you haven't got the third piece, which is user engagement, a high retention time, you can add all the keywords you want in your titles. But if people aren't listening to the entire episode, if they're not consuming and binging in a healthy way, of course, they're not going to recommend your show to more listeners. So you might rank for the right terms, but you won't rank necessarily higher or gain more listeners from that.
That makes perfect sense. So just to clarify for my listener right now, back catalog, when you're saying back catalog, you're just meaning all the past episodes that you've already published before, right?
Correct. That's
And
it.
then
Spot on, yeah.
when you're trying to figure out your keywords, do you have specific
Mm,
tools that you use or websites that you lean on? Like, YouTube, for example, people will use like TubeBuddy or
mm,
whatever, Keyword Planner, Public.
mm,
Like, are you using those? And then I'm going to add on one more question to that because I feel like it goes hand in hand. When you're picking these keywords, are you using them as search terms in terms of questions, or are they
mm-hmm,
just simply words, like standalone words? So like, let's say for this episode, for example, I would imagine like, let's say, how to grow a podcast is something that I think someone would go and search, like grow my podcast or grow a podcast.
mm,
So is it like
mm.
how to grow a podcast, or is it grow a podcast? You know what I mean?
Yes, I think so. I guess there's two pieces to the question. Could you remind me the first one? Sorry.
Okay, so the first one was which tools are you using to find these keywords? Yeah.
Awesome. So in terms of the tools that I'm using, or we encourage our clients to use, is Uber Suggest.
Okay.
That's just to let us know. And Uber Suggest will essentially let you know a broad estimate of the actual search volume of a particular keyword.
Okay.
Right. So, for example, if you were thinking about, let's say how to stop stress versus how to reduce stress
Mm-hmm.
versus stress management, these are kind of what we call variations of keywords. We're geeking out so hard
Oh,
here,
I know. I'm so
Simona.
here
This
for
is
it. I
how
love this so much.
right. So let's say, for example, your podcast talking point was on
Mm-hmm.
stress. Now, someone might type in as a search term. Imagine you have a room of 100 people. It's probably a good way to put it.
Mm-hmm.
You've got a room of 100 people. Not everyone's going to type in the exact same, all 100 people to find your podcast on stress won't all type in stress management. They won't all type in how to manage stress. They won't all type in how to reduce stress. They'll probably have a combination of all of those. So it'll be like, those three things might be the three variations of search terms they would use to try to find it.
Mm-hmm.
What Uber suggests tells us is which one of those variations is the most popular.
Okay.
Right? So it's not going to be the one that everyone uses, but it's the most popular, meaning is the one that's most in demand. So we use Uber Suggest to kind of decide which keywords we should use instead of another.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of our approach
I
to
love
it.
that.
And then I know, yeah. So does that give you a bit of clarity?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. You're gonna say something else?
No, that's
Okay,
it.
I wanted to just make sure before I ask my next question to you. How relevant would you say is the tag section in your hosting platform, where people will go in and be like, put all your tags and so on, so on. Is that relevant still? Does Apple and Spotify even pick up on that? And are you actually using it effectively if you're just putting words in without planning and understanding what keywords you're trying to rank for?
Yeah, so to be honest with you, from our end, we haven't done, I'm not going to say we've gone out there and tested the tags area as much. We know that clients that have done that, but then necessarily it doesn't make the biggest shift. It's kind of like the 80-20
Yeah.
rule. 80% of 80% of your results will come from the 20%, which is your show name, your episode titles, and the positioning of the show notes, right? Those are the main things. And then the combination of how often does that show up in your title, your show notes, everything else. So to answer your question, I wouldn't really focus on that, to be honest with you, because it's not going to be the driver of exposure and growth. I'll focus on the main thing, which is your show name, making sure you have the right keywords and search terms in your show name, in your episode titles, and then doing that consistently over a prolonged period of
Love
time.
that. I love that. And I will caveat this and say as well, I had done this a while ago. I decided to go back to previous episodes and change like the names of the previous episodes just to try and make
Mm,
them a little bit more engaging, just to see if it would make a difference if, I changed the hook or if I changed the way that it was phrased or whatever. And it actually did. I did it on YouTube as well. And I saw a bump in
mm,
views, which wasn't a whole lot. Like my YouTube channel doesn't really get as much
mm.
activity as I would like it to, but we're going to change that for 2024. That said, I don't know. I just thought that it was super crazy because it actually does work. And you can
Mm,
test things. I think
100%,
people
yeah.
forget that you can like A/B test things. Like you can test a title, you can leave it
Mhm.
for a little bit, you can change it. It's like just because it's published doesn't mean it's set in stone,
Spot on. Yeah, I completely agree. And I think I love that idea because podcast SEO is about, to me, it is about experimenting. Like you're not just setting stone. Sometimes you have to go back over a catalog, change some of the keywords we want to rank for, and we find out, oh, actually, like the search volume, yeah, it is great, but we're not attracting the right people, or it's not made as big of a change. So then we have to try and shift again. And I think if you're at a point where you're struggling to gain traction, struggling to grow, the last thing you want to do is actually be static and be worried about experimenting. Like we have to be like almost what we encourage our clients to do is like be like like a
Yeah.
scientist, right? Experiment, go through trial and error, and don't worry about like if I change this title, what will people think and all that. Most people aren't paying that much
No,
attention to
literally
it.
no
So
one
when
is
it
paying
comes again,
attention.
podcast,
Nobody will even notice.
no one. So experiment. So you're spot on. Absolutely right. Experiment.
Love
So yeah,
that.
with the hashtags, wouldn't worry about it. I'll focus on the main areas.
Perfect. I love that. Anthony, is there anything else that you want to share with our listener when it comes to this piece of discoverability? Is there anything that we may have missed? I feel like we're leaving our listener on a cliffhanger, which I'm here for because then that means they have to come back next week and listen to the next episode.
For sure. So I guess, look, here's the thing. When it comes to discoverability, the main thing you should think about is, as a starting point, is going through your back catalog is what we encourage our clients to do. Go through each specific episode. If you have a team member, that always helps. But going through each episode and ask yourself, what are the three main talking points? Then turn those talking points into keywords. And then you can just simply either go to Ubersuggest, figure out which keywords you want to use, and add them to your episode titles. Now, of course, then just add random keywords to the
No.
end because that's keyword stuffing and it's ugly. No one likes that. Me and Simona will privately take the mic and have a little lab back and forth. So make sure make sure it's integrated correctly when it comes to discoverability. And don't worry about tags and this. Focus on, again, that 80-20 rule. And in this case, the keywords in your episode title is the 80%, is the part that gets you 80% of the results. Yep. There we go.
I love that. I love that so much. Thank you so much for joining me on this first part of our series. I can't wait to chat with you on the next one. You can't tell me that that was not a powerful conversation. Anthony is such a wealth of knowledge when it comes to the SEO and podcasting world. And he left so many tangible tips in this conversation that I know you can take and implement right away to your own podcast, to your own show, and to your own process. All of Anthony's links can be found in the show notes below, as well as my links. So be sure to connect with both of us. Let us know what you love from our conversation. Say hello. We cannot wait to hear from you. I will see you on the next one.